It's the second classical game between Fabiano Caruana and Pragnananda at the FIDE World Cup 2023 semi-finals. The all-important clash. We have Fabi on the board and Pragnananda comes in. Generally, he carries with him a banana and he is here. The youngster who's played phenomenally well in this tournament. The first classical game between them ended in a draw. This is the second one, and if it's a decisive game, whoever wins it goes through to the finals. And if it's a draw, they go into tie breaks. Pragg has the white pieces. Fabi, the extremely experienced current world number 2 and former world championship challenger. Pragg, the prodigy who's taken the chess world by storm in this tournament. And we have the Indian ambassador in Azerbaijan, Mr. Sridharan, who makes the first move. Pragg thanks him for his wishes, and we are ready to rock and roll here. Handshake, and off we go. Pragg, as always, takes his time before the game. That's a ritual that he has kind of made it his own in this event. Fabi gets off his jacket. Some players prefer to play without the jacket, but Pragg keeps it on. And I often wonder what chess players think during this moment of silence that they have before the game. Is it something like, I really want to win the game? Or is it like they're just centering themselves and trying to understand what is it, how is it that they feel? Of course, the opening that they're going to play has been prepared thoroughly day before the game, and also for many hours before it. Pragg has already spent close to a minute on the clock and he is ready to go. He goes 1d4 and Caruana responds instantly with knight f6, and Pragg plays his pawn up to c4. e6 played. Generally at this level we are seeing that Queen's Gambit declined is the norm, that these players play with the pawn up to d5, and that's exactly what Caruana has done. And Pragg plays his pawn to g3. He's going for the Catalan, and his opening now resembles that of top players. g3 is what you see at the highest level, and Caruana pauses a bit because it was also possible for Pragg to play knight to c3 here. He goes g3, bishop comes out to e7, and now bishop g2. Fabi castles here, and Pragg also castles. So we have the standard position of the Catalan. You can go for the closed Catalan with c6, but you can also go for the open one with d takes c4. Fabi takes on c4, which is the most common move. Queen c2. Pragg wants to chop this pawn here. And now a6 is the common move here. Also there is b5, which is a sharp line, but a6 played by Caruana. And either you can take here or you can play a4. Pragg goes for the a4 move to stop the pawn coming to b5, because then you take, and the rook is hanging here. So that's the reason why this is played. And you're playing against this bishop on c8, which is slightly passive. And that's the reason why Caruana instantly goes bishop d7. He wants to put his bishop on c6 on this diagonal. Pragg takes the pawn on c4. And now bishop comes out to c6. The bishop is ideally placed here. Bishop to f4. This is all well-known theory. And now the main move here that Caruana plays is bishop d6, offering a trade of bishops. And Pragg comes back queen c1. His point is, if you were to take bishop takes bishop, he would take with his queen. And that's the reason why he came back. The main move in this position is now a5, and we've had some games with a5, knight c3, knight comes here, settles down on the b4 square, and it's pretty sharp. h6 played by Caruana here, and this has very few games played before, and you can see how Pragnananda now in our time lapse is actually a little bit confused, or you can say he's trying to recollect. It's not on top of his head what he should do, and he plays the move rook e1. To tell you the truth, this is only played once. Ding Liren played this move rook e1 against Levon Aronian. And so there was another game, rook d1, that was played at the highest level. But rook e1 has been Ding's choice. And the point is you want to go knight c3 and try for e4. And now you can see even Fabi does not remember or recollect what to do here. After nearly 10 minutes of thought, he takes the knight on f3. Makes sense. And Pragg would take back. Generally, when you give up this bishop, you want to then put your pawn on c6. But that would lead to a passive position. So he first takes on f4. It's very interesting what Caruana is doing here. And now queen takes f4. And a bit confusing is if you play the move c6 here, after knight a3, knight c4, looking at these squares, white is clearly better. So you don't want to play the move c6, but then this pawn is hanging and Fabi shows his plan. He's going knight c6, attacking this pawn. Now the first thought that comes to mind is, why can't we just take on c6? Because once you take, pawn takes, rook c1, this is already looking very good. However, black can go for rook b8, and this is the compensation you get for these double pawns. On the b file it's active, and you can see Pragg taking a lot of time on the clock. This is a very sharp sort of variation that can happen here. But clearly bishop takes knight is the best move in the position. Pragg has thought for more than 15 minutes here. And now finally he has to make a decision what to do. Bishop c6, knight c3 is another option. You want to go rook d1, but rook d1 is met with e5. He goes knight a3, and that is not a good move. He's actually made a mistake here, and now Caruana has this very, very nice idea, which is to play knight takes d4, hit the bishop, which Pragg has of course seen. Bishop takes pawn, here bishop a6, and now comes the killer move, which Pragg may have missed, e5. What a move this is, because after queen takes, you go rook e8, and now the queen does not have squares, because if you go to c5, I already, there are knight b3 ideas. If you go to a5, there is still knight b3. And if you go back to f4, I have g5 pushing you back, queen c1, and now you can fork it here with knight b3, but also knight g4. An amazing move. Looking at e2 square, looking at queen f6, f2, the queen will attack the bishop, and this is actually winning position for black. So all that Caruana has to calculate is knight d4, bishop b7, rook b8, bishop a6, and e5, pawn sacrifice. But it's not an easy move to calculate, especially with Pragg sort of behaving so confidently, and he has played so well in the tournament. Can Caruana do it? He thinks for 17 minutes and then goes for the move g5. This is not the best move, but it is the second best move in the position. So pretty good there by Caruana. And now Pragg has to move his queen away, and so he plays it queen takes e3, queen to e3. And now black, well, now knight d4 isn't that powerful, because after bishop b7, rook b8, bishop a6, there's no e5 gaining tempo here. So this position is fine now for Pragg. So the best move now is to take on d4 with the queen, and that's exactly what Fabi does. He takes the pawn, and now Praggnanandhaa can chop that pawn, chop that queen off, which he does. Queen takes, knight takes, attacking the bishop. The bishop is going to take the pawn on b7. He does it. Bishop takes b7, attacking the rook. Now if rook b8, there is bishop takes a6. And although black has good play after rook b2, this a pawn looks dangerous. And that's the reason why Caruana goes rook a7 and not rook b8. Pragg comes back with his bishop to g2. Now the material is even. Black's pawns are also a little bit split. But the biggest problem here, which Caruana shows with his next move, is this weakened b pawn. And also the b3 square and the b4 square. The rook is ready to come in. The knight is ready to come here. And white is in massive trouble actually. Rook d1. And Pragg is ready to give up material, because if knight e2, king f1, rook b2, there is knight c4 hitting the rook, rook c2, and it's an instant draw. So that's the reason why Pragg is like, okay, Fabi, if you want to take this, be my guest. But Caruana has a very nice move. Either you can go knight b3, but also just cementing the knight in the center with c5. And he plays it. You can bank on Fabi to grind this position to the fullest. Pragg is worse and he has a passive position and he has to be very, very careful here with 39 minutes on the clock, 54 minutes for Fabi. How does Pragnananda continue here? Because his b2 pawn is hanging. Well, one idea is to kick the knight away with e3, and maybe that's the best move. He plays his pawn to e3. Now, this knight can actually go to b3. That's exactly what Fabi does. And I would expect Pragg to go rook a2. Because the point is, after rook b4, when he attacks here, you can defend it this way. But Pragg actually plays rook b1, and the rook is very passive. Because both these squares are controlled by the knight. Rook b4 comes in and he's attacking this pawn. How does Pragg defend it? It's actually not at all easy. Because if you push your pawn to a5, the knight can simply take it. So that's not possible. Pragg goes rook d3. And his point is that if you take here, I will take your knight. So that's not possible. And if you play c4, then I will take this, and take this, which is fine for me. So Fabi now needs to figure out how to continue. He goes rook c7, although rook d7 would have been a better move to exchange this active rook, and play could have gone something like this. But instead, he goes rook c7, and maybe somewhere his plan is c4. But Pragg's next move is a classy one, bishop f1. And he plays again c4, because once you play this, I take, rook takes here, rook takes and bishop takes, and white is better. So Pragg being very resourceful in his defense. Fabi now going king g7, so that at a later point there's no rook d8 check tempo that can be gained. And Pragg now has to figure out again what to do. He goes rook to d1. Still the a4 pawn cannot be picked up because of rook b3. Still c4 is not possible because of the knight c4 trick. So Caruana's next plan clearly is to bring this knight into the game. He brings knight d5. Now, very good move. He blocks the d file. The pressure is mounting on Pragnananda. Fabi moves away from the board. Pragg has 16 minutes, 15 minutes on the clock. Caruana has 32 minutes. You still have to make 15 moves to reach move number 40. But Pragg's next move here, very cool, e4. He's trying to gain counterplay. Once again, the pawn is off limits. You take here, you lose your knight. So the knight has to move. But actually, Caruana's plan was this all throughout. He wanted to provoke e4 so that he gets the d4 square for his knight on b3. Once imagine the knight sits there on d4. Look at how weak the b2 and a4 pawns are. So Pragg now, after e4, has made a move which is positionally dubious, and so has to play very, very sharp chess. Knight c2, excellent move, hitting the rook. Now the rook has to move back. If you go rook b6, there is rook d6 ideas attacking a6 pawn. So he goes rook b7. And what does Pragg do now? His e4 pawn is a little loose. He goes bishop g2. And he tells Fabi, my plan is e5. And if you come here, I'll take your knight. So he's creating a lot of tactical play in this position. And Caruana goes knight g4. He's angling for knight e5, pawn to c4, and then cementing his knight on the d3 square. That would be really, really tough for Pragg to deal with. But Pragg plays e5. This is the thing about this youngster. He always keeps finding tactical resources. He's hitting the rook on b7 and he's gained some space. But also he has had to calculate knight takes e5 because his own rook would be attacked there. Caruana goes knight e5 and takes the pawn. Well, Pragg has to take the rook on b7, and that's what he does. He takes the rook. Caruana takes the rook as well. And now b2 is hanging, so Pragg takes here. And the important point to note is you can't take here because after rook b1, you're losing one of the two knights. So what do you do next here? He goes c4. And now b2 is hanging, because if this falls, c3 is coming in. Pragg continues his tactical prowess here. He takes on c4, because if rook takes c4, you have rook takes. And here's the key point, that if you go knight c1, I still have rook d2. So that's fine. So after bishop c4, FIDE could have taken here, but there was still rook b1. But instead he takes on f2. And now you can simply take back. King takes f2. And while I do think that this game is heading towards a draw, there's a big problem that Pragg faces. Knight is hanging, pawn is hanging, and this is move number 34. He 6 minutes to figure out. Well, you couldn't go into the variation if you hadn't seen the next move, knight a1. Fantastic move played by Pragnananda, because if you take here, he will take the knight, and if you take the knight, then I get a rook behind the pawn, which is very important here. So he goes knight to c5. And this is Pragg's idea again, which is to play pawn to b3. The knight on a1 is terrible. It's passive, but it's supporting this entire construction, which is giving white good play on the queen side. Rook b4 played, attacking the pawn on b3. And now Pragg cannot go rook b1 because there is knight a4. And he cannot go rook d3 because the knight controls it. So he needs to find a way to continue the game, and he finds it. King e3, excellent move. Because if knight takes b3, there is rook a1, rook b1 pinning here. And so that's a very, very important tactical resource. f5 played by FIDE, and he's saying, now my threat is to take. If you go rook b1 to pin me here, I have a check to the king, and my knight is unpinned here on b3. So Pragg goes king d2, and he says to FIDE, be my guest, take this pawn if you like, but I will come king c3, and once again you will be in trouble. So that's the reason why king d2 was played. Caruana goes f4. It's a full-fledged race here. 37th move. We have 3 more moves to go. First, Pragg brings his king into the position, attacking the rook. The rook will move back. He goes back. And now if you are not accurate and you go king c4, you are in trouble after rook c8. Very strong move. So Pragg finds g takes f4 first. G takes f4. And now the 40th move before time control. He must play the move a5, which is a strong move. He plays it. He finds a5, and he finds it with 2 seconds on the clock. He looks at FIDE's score sheet. That 40th move is coming to an end, and then gets up from his chair. Caruana makes knight e4 move, and now it's a check. Now, look at this. If you go king c4, then the problem is f3, f2, rook going to f1. There's a fork here. So you can't play. And so Pragg actually in deep thought what to do. You can't go to the d file as well. King d3 is met with knight f2, king d4 with rook d8. So he needs to go to b2, and he's already spent 15 minutes on the clock, and finds king to b2, and now pawn up to f3. Now the knight comes out to c2, and pawn pushes forward with f2. So Caruana pushes his pawn here, and this is getting very, very dangerous for Pragg. He needs to find his own play, and he needs to stop this pawn, because knight d2 is also a threat. So he goes rook f1. Now important to note that after take, check, king b4, knight f1, a6, knight comes out. I have knight e3 stopping the pawn. So that is completely fine. You can't take this and win here. So one way to play this position, and I was analyzing king g6, a6, king g5, knight b4, very important resource. You can't take the knight because there is a7 and I queen. So you have to go king g4, then I come back, king f3, now I take a7, rook a8 and rook a1, and this is a very good chance for draw because b4, b5, b6. But clearly the most natural idea in this position is to bring your king up. This is the most natural idea for Caruana. And he's taking his time, which is the correct strategy here, that he must think. But for sure, I mean, for Pragg, it's a very tough situation after king comes up, because he has to find many accurate moves. But Caruana plays e5, and this is slightly surprising, because now Pragg pushes his pawn forward, and he asks Caruana, what are you doing now? Knight comes back to c5, attacking the pawn. And the knight goes to b4. Very good move. He defends it, because now if you take here, a7 is already winning here. So that's the reason why he plays rook a8. But now this is an admission of maybe not defeat, but saying that, okay, my pawn here on f2, I didn't believe in it. I can actually give it up, and now Pragg can take it with his rook. He takes it, rook takes f2 played, and now after knight takes on a6, you can just take it, and the rook endgame is a draw. If you take, this is an easy draw. Praggnanandhaa, in fact, about to make his move, and he plays knight c6 and offers a draw. Interesting. And Caruana instantly accepts it, and that ends the game. What a fight that was. Again, Caruana, there Pragg shaking his head. He had to defend throughout. In fact, in both the classical games, he has had to defend tenaciously against Caruana's pressure. But the youngster has managed to do it and force the match to go into tie breaks, where they will play 2 games of 25 plus 10 rapid, 2 games of 10 plus 10 rapid, then 2 games of 5 plus 3. I mean, if everything remains equal, and then you have the sudden death. Both players arranging the pieces. There's going to be a toss which will happen to determine who gets the white pieces in the first rapid game. And there you have the arbiter doing the toss. He takes 2 pawns in his hands and he puts it behind, and maybe he'll ask one of the players to choose. He asks Caruana. Caruana has the white pieces in the first rapid game of 25 plus 10. This will be very exciting. We'll see if Praggnanandhaa manages to again beat Caruana and reach the finals, just like he beat Hikaru. Will Pragg manage to do that? And there you have the fair play officer in the distance telling both the players that we need to check you. And